Should migrants be banned from getting social housing before Brits? It's time now for the head-to-head. And Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has promised that a reform government in Wales will ensure that locals get housing before migrants.
If you come in by small boat illegally, you are to be welcomed into Wales. I also find it, hard to understand how, when it comes to social housing, and Wales does have a housing problem, as many other parts of the country does, that there is no prioritisation of Welsh people for social housing. Well, let me tell you, when we win next year, that will all change.
He also promised to scrap Wales's, quote, nation of sanctuary status, which was introduced by the current Labour government and helps asylum seekers get access to council accommodation. Although migrants usually must have been in the UK for 5 years before they can get access to social housing, the cost of housing migrants in hotels and other emergency accommodation has ballooned to a staggering £4.7 billion. That is the equivalent of every penny in tax paid by the population of Manchester. Tonight I'm asking, is Nigel Farage right? Should migrants be banned from getting social housing before Brits? I want to know your views. Go to gbnews.com/your say. Going head-to-head on this now are the Director for the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and Senior Political Advisor, Pablo O'Hana. Thank you very, very much. Stephen, straight down the line here. Should Brits get social housing before migrants?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. 100%. I was one of those who had to wait 5 or 6 years for social housing in the 70s. I lived in a room with my brother sharing a single bed whilst my mother, who was aged 22 at the time, had to share the other bed on the other side of the room. We had to wait 6 years for that in a time when there was more social housing around and less people coming across on boats or receiving indefinite leave to remain. But we still had to wait. And there are 250,000 people in this country today who are born in this country who have to suffer and wait for the same sort of circumstances that we had. Now, I was lucky. I won a scholarship for a private school. I got education. I became a lawyer. I've got out and now have a nice life. And that too can happen to many people in our country, but they're being squeezed out, as we know, where we've got some areas in Ealing, for example, that 75% of all social housing are for those who are non-UK born citizens. And when you have a right, an indefinite right to remain, that enables you to fall within the Housing Act 1996 principle of need, you now become ahead of many citizens in this country. It's unfair, it's unjust, and that is against the British principles of justice in this country. OK,
Pablo, I'll bring you in. It's unfair, unjust and against British values. Go.
If it was happening, I would agree, but there's no queue jumping to ban. 9 out of 10 social homes go to UK nationals. In fact,
nonsense.
As you know, asylum seekers and migrants
right now,
can't apply. They cannot apply.
Well, no, sorry, let's just have that on. Sorry, one sec. So it's a major point. It's a major point. I want to let Pablo speak, but if you say that those figures that Pablo said are completely wrong, Stephen, do you want to quote them and then we get Pablo to come back to that?
Yeah, you're looking at the Labour Party's own government figures that talk around 75% of certain areas of Ealing are non-social housing. 51% of places in London, such as Brent, are areas that are having non-social social housing contained by those people who are non-UK citizens. Okay. You've got areas like Manchester and Bradford are rising. Name me the areas, Pablo, where you're seeing these figures of 80 or 90%.
Well, let's
Give me
Pablo
the stats yourself. Give me the figures.
That is from the Office of National Statistics, that across the country, 9 out of 10 social homes go to UK nationals. As you know, asylum seekers and migrants cannot apply. There is a very legitimate concern about social housing in the UK. Last year, England only added about 25,000 social homes, but the same number was sold or demolished. So there is a completely legitimate issue with social housing. But the answer isn't to blame migrants. They're not the problem. They make up less than 10% of the problem. The problem is we're not building enough social homes, and we're not cracking down on dodgy landlords. We're not cracking down on people who exploit the housing system. Instead, this whole issue is being fabricated by Nigel Farage to whip up frustration and anti-immigration sentiments ahead of an election, because that's the only platform he can run on and win on, being baseless, fictional and divisive.
Okay,
there is no queue jumping ban. Otherwise, I would agree with you.
Well, I think you might have to start agreeing, I'm afraid, Pablo, and I'll put this to Stephen. I'm looking at some facts here that have been checked by the ONS and by Reuters, which say that 47.6% of London's social housing was occupied by people describing themselves as born outside of the UK. So I would suggest that maybe that indicates that there is a bit of queue jumping going on.
And also, Pablo will agree that when you get indefinite leave to remain, you become a British national, which is very different to someone who is a UK-born citizen. And that is the clear distinction. Once you get indefinite leave to remain, you can form, because you have a passport, you're given the right to remain here, and your statistics become a British national.
OK, Pablo?
And if you are a British national, you're entitled to housing. So I don't see what the problem is. 90% of homes go to UK nationals. Less than 10% go to EU citizens and non-EU citizens, so on and so forth. But if you are a British citizen, then you're entitled.
And that's an interesting point. Now, Pablo, in your view, does simply having a British passport make you as British as somebody who was born here or somebody whose parents were born here? Is that all it takes in your mind to realistically be British, just have the document?
I mean, the definition of British varies from person to person. I think if you come to this country and you contribute financially, you integrate in our society, you hold a passport, you live here, you pay taxes, then yes, you're a British citizen, and we should be welcoming those people as long as they're contributing.
That's an interesting view, because, Stephen, just I'll put this to you, I don't know how you feel about it, but if I decided to move to Pakistan tomorrow and I'd stayed there for a period of time and worked hard and I suddenly came into possession of a Pakistani passport, I think it would be utterly ludicrous to claim that I am Pakistani. I am not. I also think it would be utterly ludicrous for the Pakistani government to give me social housing, potentially ahead of a Pakistani national. So why do we accept that here?
We accept it here because we've made rules and laws that enable people to claim social housing under the 1996 Housing Act and the Race Relations Act prior to that in 1976, that makes no discrimination between someone who is a UK-born citizen and someone who acquires that passport. You know, my grandmother was Irish. She didn't acquire the passport of being British. She remained Irish. And nor did my Black American grandfather, but my English grandfather did. And there is a very distinct difference between someone like myself, who was born in the UK, and someone who comes from Afghanistan and is granted indefinite leave to remain, and then is provided with the social housing because he now falls within need. And my point is, there are people born in this country, over 250,000 that I've mentioned so far, that are born in this country. It doesn't matter about their race, Pablo. It doesn't matter about their creed or color. They were born here, a variety of different ages, a variety of different races, colors, creeds. They have a right to housing. And whilst you might be right that social housing is not being built, they should have priority before someone who comes from a different country.
All right, look, we're going to have to knock it on there. But thank you very much, though, chaps, both of you. That is, of course, Stephen Wolfe, there, who's the Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, and Senior Political Advisor Pablo O'Hana. Who do you agree with? Let's go to the inbox. Jack, on your say.